Hello everyone, in today's video we are going to create a project that is going to involve real-time data processing using Kafka, Node.js, MySQL and React. Alright, let's now visualize how our entire system is going to work. First, we are going to pull two containers, that is going to be Zookeeper and Kafka from Docker Hub. Then we are going to have the Kafka setup in which we have an admin.js file which is going to set up Kafka topics. Then we are going to set up the producer that is going to send data message to the Kafka topics. Then we are going to have consumers that is going to consume messages from the Kafka topics, and then it is going to insert them into MySQL database. And our backend, which is going to be Node.js and Express, it is going to provide the API endpoints to fetch the data from the MySQL database, and after it has fetched the data from the MySQL database, then we are going to have the front end which is going to fetch the data from our backend and it is going to display it. So now before we move ahead, let's look at some prerequisites that you are going to need to follow along with me in this video. So you can visit to my website which is few.dev. The link is in the description. Here, first prerequisite is going to be that you should have Node.js and npm installed on your local machine. Then you are going to install MySQL. You have to go to this website and install MySQL for your operating system. Then install MySQL Workbench, which is essential because we want to work with MySQL database. So this is the link for it. Alright. And then you have to create your account for the train data API. For that, you have to visit to this website which is networkrail.co.uk, and then you have to visit this data feed site, and this is going to open a new tab over here. This is going to ask you to sign into your account. If you do not have the account, create one account, grab the username and the password because you are going to need this ahead. And then for the front end, you have to head over to this website and set up your project like this. Create your project, install the Tailwind CSS, configure. This is just the simple steps you have to follow for setting up your front end. And also you are going to need Docker Hub account and Docker installed on your computer. So now that we have all the things in place, let's move and create our backend. So this is how our backend folder structure is going to look like. We are going to have 4 files: admin, client, consumer and producer.js file. And the front end structure, I already told you how you have to set this up. Okay, then open the terminal, navigate inside to the backend directory, and in here we are going to initialize this as a Node.js backend. So let's run the command npm init-y. Then we are going to need some dependencies to work on with. So npm install Kafka.js, MySQL second or MySQL 2, Express, Stompit and async. This is going to install all of the dependencies that we need. Now that we have the backend structure ready, let's now work with Kafka admin and client. So for that, open the admin.js file. So in the admin.js file, we will connect to Kafka, create topics for train activation and cancellation, and also then disconnect from Kafka. So in this file, we start by initializing the Kafka client, and then we will configure it with the client ID and the list of brokers. The client ID is a unique identifier for the client, and the brokers array is going to contain the addresses of the Kafka brokers that client is going to connect to. And now over here, this is my IP address. So make sure to replace it with your IP address, okay? And to do so, go to your Wi-Fi settings and there you will have your IP. And then replace this with your IP address. Then we are going to have an admin client initialization, basically the init function. It is going to be asynchronous function that is going to initialize our admin client. Then inside the admin client, we are trying to connect to Kafka, and after it has successfully connected, then the admin client is going to proceed to create the two topics, In our case, it is going to be train activation and train cancellation. And our both the topics are configured with num partition, which is set to 2. Basically, this specifies the number of partition for every topic. And finally, after creating the topic, the admin client is going to disconnect from the Kafka cluster. And this step is important because we have to free up the resources and prevent memory leaks. And at the end of the script, we call in the init function to execute. So that is what we are going to have for admin.js file. Let's save this file. And now open the client.js file. And in the client.js file, we will set up the basic Kafka client configuration that we are going to also use in all of the other files. And this is basically the configuration file for establishing the connection to the Kafka and MySQL database. In here, we start by importing the Kafka.js library. Then we are going to create the Kafka instance. This is going to be configured with options like client ID and brokers. Client ID is going to be the string that is going to identify the client to the Kafka cluster, and broker is an array of string that is going to specify the address of the Kafka brokers in the cluster. So in our example, there is just one broker at this particular address. Again, over here, this is my IP address. You have to replace it with yours. Alright. And that's basically what we're going to have for this client.js file. And with the admin and client setup, let's move on and create our Kafka producer in producer.js file. And this producer is going to send the train data message to our Kafka topics. So in this file, we basically start off by importing the Kafka from Kafka.js library, stomp it and async. And then we configure the Kafka brokers. And then we create a Kafka producer instance with a specific client ID and the broker address, which is coming from here. Okay. Then we have this init Kafka producer async function that is going to connect our producer to Kafka. And then down over here, we initialize our Kafka producer. And then from here, we are going to use the stomped library to configure a Stomp client for connecting to the public data server with a specific connection header, which is going to be login and the passcode. And here you have to replace this username and password with your username and password that you had while creating an account on public speed network rail website. So basically here we have to add this to the .env file for production, because exposing credentials like this is not a good practice. But as this will just keep on increasing the complexity for this video, I am going to leave this up to you. So you have to use the .env package to fetch the credentials from the .env file. Otherwise, if you are just in the development mode, you can just have your username and password over here. And then we have specified the reconnect option for our Stomp client to handle the reconnections. And after it, we have to set up the Stomp connection and subscription. And to establish a connection to the Stomp server, we are going to use this connect manager and set up error handling for the connection issue. So if there is any error connecting to the Stomp server, we are going to console log the message terminal error gave up reconnecting and whatever the error message will be. But if the connection is successful, we are going to subscribe to a specific topic, which is going to be this. This is the destination for it, and it has certain headers and it is going to listen for the incoming messages. And client.subscribe is going to help us subscribe to the network rail feed. But if there was an error subscribing to the network's rail feed website, we are going to throw an error and show it into the console. But if the subscription was successful and we are receiving the messages, then we are going to parse the message body as a JSON, and we are then going to process each item based on its type. For example, train activation and train cancellation. So this is the train activation type, which is set to 0001, and this is the train cancellation type, which is set to 0002. And both of these message items are depending upon the message type, which is this. Okay, alright. And then it is going to bring in the relevant information for that particular message type. Then we are going to send the message to Kafka using this send to Kafka async function that is going to take in the topic name and message object, convert it to string and send it to Kafka. So this is the function that we have declared over here. Okay, and if it was successful, we are going to have a message sent to Kafka topic. If not, you are going to have an error also shown. So that is what we are going to have for producer.js file. Let's now set up our Kafka consumer in consumer.js file. This consumer will read the message from the Kafka topics and save data to our MySQL database. So over here we are going to use the Kafka.js for Kafka integration and MySQL 2 for MySQL database operations. Then down over here we create a connection pool to the MySQL database with specified credentials and connection limit. The host for me is 127.0.0.1, but for you it can even be local host. So make sure to replace the host with your host, and the user and the password is going to be your root username and password that you have set while setting up the workbench. And then here we have the database. In our case, the database is going to be named as trail_data. And then configure the Kafka consumers, including the brokers and the log level, which is set to debug for debugging in detail. Then we initialize a Kafka consumer with specific client ID and the group ID. And the consumer subscribes to the topic, train activation and train cancellation. Then we are going to have this init Kafka consumer async function that is going to connect the consumer to the Kafka and subscribe to the specified topics and process incoming messages. And for each message, it is going to parse the value of that message to a JSON object. And then we are also going to log the message and insert the relevant data into MySQL database based on whatever the topic it is. And if the topic is train activation, then it is going to insert the data into active_train database. And then we have this function to format the timestamp to MySQL data time format. Okay, and then we have this two function that is going to be insert active train and insert cancelled train functions to insert the data into active_train and cancelled_train tables respectively. Okay, and then down we initialize the Kafka consumer, and then it is going to listen to the two signals that is going to disconnect the Kafka consumer and terminate the process. And that is what we are going to have for the consumer.js file. Now we have to set up our MySQL database. So into the MySQL workbench, I am going to go into my connection which I have set, but if you don't have any, what you can do is click on this plus button and create your connection, and then this is going to be your host name for that connection. So make sure to replace it with the host that we set into the consumer.js file, and the username can be different for you. So even replace the username with whatever the username that you have over here, and the password is that which you have set up by installing this MySQL workbench. Okay, and then click on OK. But I already have this connection, so let's open this, and in here we are going to start off by creating our database. So for that we have this command create database trail_data, and then let's execute this. It will give this message that yes, the database is created with the name rail_data. Let's refresh this, and then you will have this rail data database. And after that we have to specify which database we want to work with. So say use rail_data, and then also execute this command. And now this is going to use the rail data database. And then we have to create two tables, one for cancel train and one for active train, with specific ID, train ID, stenox and timestamp. Let's now execute this. Okay, and let's refresh this, and in here we are going to have two tables, active trains and cancel trains. Okay, and now if you have to check if it has set up correctly, we have this command describe active trains, which is going to bring in the tables, and then we have our table over here. Similarly, you can even look for cancelled train. So basically this means that we have set up our database too. And now that we have set up our backend and database, it's time to test them. So for that, first of all, we have to pull in the Zookeeper container and the Kafka container using Docker. So for it, you have to open the terminal. So before we move ahead, make sure that your Docker desktop is running, otherwise it will not be able to pull the containers. So for pulling the Zookeeper container, we have to command docker run -p, and we are mapping the port to 2181, which is default for Zookeeper, and then we are bringing in the Zookeeper container, and then let's hit enter, and here you can see that it has started pulling that container. And now it's time to bring in our Kafka container. So for that we have this command, that is docker run -p. We are mapping the port for it to 9092. So basically this is the command that we have to pull in the Kafka container. So to understand this command, I would suggest please visit the documentation for this lesson. There I have explained everything about this command in detail. So let's now hit enter. Then it is going to pull in our Kafka container. So yes, it has started basically. So now the Zookeeper, this is running on 2181 and the Kafka is running on 9092. So as we have Zookeeper and Kafka running, let's now start the Kafka producer and consumer. So for that, open the VS Code, and in here we are going to open the terminal, and in your project directory head over to the backend directory, and in here we are going to run the command node producer.js, which is going to start our producer, and you will see the message that says producer connected successfully, and it should give us the list of trains, just like this, that are active or cancelled. You can see over here train cancellation, train activation. Alright, so that means the messages are being sent to the Kafka topic. Alright, then open the another terminal, and in here same, navigate to the backend folder and start the consumer. For that we have to run the command node consumer.js, and it has also started. So you can see it gives the message inserted cancel train data. So something like this, okay? So that means the producer and consumer is working perfectly fine. They are sending and processing the train data messages. So now that we know the producer is working fine, let's verify that this data is being stored in our MySQL database. For that, let's open MySQL Workbench. So here we are on the workbench, and to check that the data is being sent and stored in our table, we have to run the command select from active_train, and then let's hit this icon, and here you will see that the train IDs which are active are being stored over here. This means that our data is getting perfectly stored in MySQL database, which is rail_data. Similar to this, you can check for cancel train also. Okay, now that we have confirmed that Kafka producers consumers are working perfectly fine, and even our MySQL database is also working perfectly fine, let's create our backend entry point, that is going to be server.js file. Head back to the VS Code, and in here in the backend directory, let's create a file named server.js. This is going to be entry point for our server. In here we are going to create our API endpoints to fetch the data from our MySQL database. At start, we are going to have all of the dependencies that we need, such as Express, MySQL and course. Then we initialize an Express application instant and set the server port at 8080. You can use any port that you want. And then we also enable course to handle cross-origin request. Then over here we are creating a connection pool to MySQL database with the specific credentials such as host, user, password, and whatever our database name will be. We are also setting the maximum number of connection in the pool to 10. Then we use express.json middleware to parse the incoming request with JSON payloads. Then we are going to have two API endpoints. The first one is going to get the active trains data, and here we also support pagination with limit and offset query parameters. And similar to active trains, we have another endpoint that is going to be for cancel train. This is going to fetch the cancel train data from our cancelled_trains table present in MySQL database, that is rail_data. And finally, the server is going to listen on a specified port, and it is going to log a message that is going to indicate that the server is running and it is accessible on port, whatever the port we have defined above. Alright, and that is it for the backend setup. Now before moving to the front end part, let's see that we are getting the data. So let's save the server.js file, open the terminal, and in here let's open another terminal. Navigate to the backend folder and then run the command node server.js to start our server, and you will see the message that the server is running on port 8000. Let's head over here, and on the localhost 8000 let's paste our endpoint over here, and there we do get the trains that are active and are running. Okay, and similarly you can even check for cancelled train. So now that we know that our backend is also working perfectly fine, let's move ahead and create the front end part of our application. Okay, front end. So open the front end folder, and inside the source folder we are going to need 3 files. One for active train list, second for cancel train list, and third one will be the train data. Let's start and create these files. So let's start by creating a component for active trains list. Okay, let's open this file. So in this file, basically first thing first, we bring in the React and Axios. Okay, and then we create a functional component that is going to be active trains list, that is going to take API URL and limit as 2 parameters. And we use useState and useEffect hook from React for managing the state and side effects. Then we have another function that is going to be fetch item. This is going to fetch the data from a specified API URL which is passed as a prop. Then inside it we have a function that is fetch items. This is going to fetch the data from the specified API URL. So basically this is going to help us fetch the data from API endpoint with limit and offset query parameter. But if the response data length is less than the limit, there are no more items to fetch. Okay, and then we append the new data to the existing list of items that we have and increment the offset for the next request. But if there were any errors, we are just going to throw it, and then we set the loading to false after we have fetched the data. And after that, this is going to render a list of trains, a loading message and a error message if there are any, and a load more button to fetch the additional items if they are available. Okay, so that is what we are going to have for active trains list.jsx file. So let's now save this file, and similar to this we are going to create the list for cancelled trains. So let's now work with this file, and over here we have the same code as we had for active trains list.jsx file. The only change will be this is going to make the request to another API endpoint, which is cancel train API endpoint. Otherwise everything is same as to what we had for active trains list.jsx file. So that is what we are going to have for both of these files. So let's save this file also. Now we are going to work with train data.jsx file. So in this file, we first start by importing React, useState, useEffect and Axios. And then we have the state initialization for active trains and cancel train. And then we have the state initialization for active trains, which is going to be an array to store the list of active trains, and cancel train that is going to store the list of cancelled trains. Then we use the useEffect hook to perform the side effect on this component. It is going to contain the 2 asynchronous function to fetch the data from an API. So fetch active train is going to make an HTTP GET request to this particular API endpoint that we tested earlier, and on success it is going to update the active trains state with the response data. But if it was fail, we are going to console log the error. And then we have this fetch cancel train. This is going to make an HTTP GET request to this cancel train API endpoint. And then down over here we have the JSX, which is going to show the heading 1 of train data, active trains, and it is going to show the table for active trains. And then we have table for cancelled trains. This is going to fetch the details about the trains that are cancelled. So that is what we are going to have for train data.jsx file. Now we have to call all of this in app.jsx file. So let's open this file, grab all of this and remove this because we do not need any of this over here. And this is what we are going to have for app.jsx file. We first bring in the React and our 2 functional component, that is cancel train and active trains list, and this will display the list of trains that are fetched from this particular API URLs. Okay, this is going to bring in the list or tables for the cancel trains, and this is going to bring the list for active trains. So that is what we are going to have for app.jsx file. So let's now save this file, and that is all we have for our React or front end code. And now we have to test our front-end application. But before that, we have to bring in the Axios because we have used it over here, right? So let's open the terminal and open another window over here. Navigate to the front-end folder and run the command npm i axios to install this package because we will need it. So now that is done, let's run the command npm start, or is it dev? Let's check it in the package.json file. Okay, so it is dev. So let's run the command npm run dev, and you will see that our application is started on 5173 port. So let's head over there. And there we have the list for the cancelled trains and for the active trains. And when you click on load more, it is going to load more train data. So basically this does gives us the data from our MySQL database. So let's click on load more for the active trains, and it should give us more train IDs. And there, yes, it does. I know this does not looks good because it is just giving us the list for cancelled trains and active trains, but we can do styling for it, and I am leaving that up to you because that is easy. You just have to use Tailwind CSS classes for styling both of these components. And that is it. We have successfully integrated Kafka with Node.js for real-time data processing using Docker to manage the Zookeeper and Kafka containers and store and retrieve the data from MySQL database. So that is all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. If you did, then please do not forget to like and subscribe. Also, if you have any doubts, please drop them into the comment section. I will be happy to help. I have also left the link for its project's GitHub repository and this lesson's documentation in the description. So please do check it if you get confused anywhere, and I'll see you in the next one. Till then, bye bye and take care.